me, and I know you'll see that a song changes everything.
Well, good morning. I am Elizabeth Copeland. I am the founder and chief playwright for Grief Dialogues, and I'm honored to be here with these two wonderful people. And I would like to introduce my co-host for my Out of Grief Comes Art podcast, Halle Williams.
Hi, everyone. You guys all know me. I'm not a new face.
You're new to our people, maybe, though.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Hi,
Yeah.
I'm Halle Williams. I'm the marketing director for Grief Dialogues, and I am recording live for you, I guess, from Seattle area. I'm on my back deck of my childhood home, which is kind of fun. I'm visiting my mom. So we are going to have a great episode today.
It's so beautiful. Yeah.
A little gray and cold, but we're not complaining.
And I just heard thunderclouds, but I'm with it. I'm with it.
We'll make this quick.
This will get exciting.
Yes. We'll see what water does on your art project today.
Projects. Tell me more.
Yes. Catherine, do you want to tell everybody what we're doing today and what supplies they'll need so they'll have headphones on so they can run around, get their supplies while we're chatting?
Yes. Sure. So we're doing kind of a memory-based project today, and you can really use anything you have on hand, but have some colors. So it can be crayons, colored pencils, watercolors, paints. You can use brushes, your fingers. Yep, those work. And you'll need a sheet of paper. I would get a few sheets of paper.
I have like half a paper stack. Okay,
that's fine. Yeah, a pencil. I mean, you don't need a pencil, but as long as you have some colors, you'll be good to go.
So recycled paper.
Oh,
that's fine.
Okay, we got it.
That makes me feel bad. Mine is like fresh out. That's recycled is smart.
I want to start off for our listeners at Arts for the Health of It and talking about what you do at Grief Dialogues and for Out of Grief Comes Art. Because I think we're doing this on a very special day. And that's why we're all coming together today to talk about grief. And so I want to know kind of your side of what your organization does to deal with grief. And we'll talk about how our side does. And then we'll all merge together and make beautiful art.
Oh, I love it. Okay, well, great. Well, as I mentioned, I'm the founder of Grief Dialogues. And Grief Dialogues is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Seattle, Washington. But we do our work actually globally. We've done shows in the UK as well as around the country here. It started because I'm a big theater buff, moved to New York City after high school to be a famous actress. Obviously, that didn't work out real well, but my theater love was still there. And about 6-7 years ago now, I lost 3 people very close to me in 1 year. And whenever I would bring up the situation or the discussion around grief and death, a lot of people, you just see their eyes glaze over and, they change the topic to weather or whatever would come up in their minds, anything but death, right? Because it was contagious. So I started writing a play that is actually a composite of the 3 deaths that I had been witness to in that year. And then once the play, and actually, so I showed it to some theater friends who really enjoyed it, told me to enter it in the contest. I did. And started winning some of these contests. And those of you who are playwrights out there know that when you win a contest, what you win is an opportunity to have your play staged. So no monetary value, but definitely a real fantastic opportunity. So the play was, at that time, the play was Hospice, a Love Story. And it's a short play between 2 sisters. And it's about the day after their mother has died. And I traveled the country because I always like to attend when my play is being performed. And I found that in the audiences, if people knew that I was the playwright, that led to them talking about their own grief situations or their own loss of a loved one in some way. And it was like my play was giving them permission to share their stories. And that's how Grief Dialogues was born. I approached several playwright friends of mine, and then I even did a call for submissions. We got 6 short plays depicting various scenarios around dying, death, and or grief. And we interspersed some poetry between the plays, creating about an hour and 10-minute stage production. And boy, did the conversations really happen after that production. And we actually facilitate background talkback. I should say we facilitate talkbacks, usually with end of life experts and therapists, etc. And we have actually found that more times than not, in fact, one performance we had here on Bainbridge Island outside Seattle, the show went on for an hour and 10 minutes. The talkback went on for an hour and 20 minutes. And I actually had to gently cut it off. But anyway, so that's how Grief Dialogues was born. I needed help doing social media in the early stages. And I reached out to Halle. Take it away, Halle.
Oh,
And you're on.
no. So I was in college, and actually, I've known Elizabeth my whole life. She's one of my mom's really, really close friends, and so she's seen me grow up. And I'm sure they were having wine one night, and she was talking about Grief Dialogues, and my mom plugged me in and was like, "You know, Halle goes to school for marketing. Why don't you call her?" So she called me, and it started kind of as a like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I need work for school, for my portfolio and experience. And she was like, I need help. And so that kind of worked. And then I fell in love with it. I just felt like the message and conversation was super important. And so I have been here since. Very recently, I have experienced grief in different ways, various ways, like while growing up, right? But the first big grief movement for me was just actually this February when my dad really suddenly passed. It was one of those unexpected, expected things. He'd been sick for a long time with diabetes and congestive heart failure, which a lot of people I think in their mind, don't register that as like an illness that can be terminal. Like, like it's one of those things you hear like, oh, someone has diabetes, and they're like, okay. And you don't, there's different, it's a scale. Right. And my dad had been sick for a long time and really not taking care of himself for most of my life. And the doctors always said, if you don't take care of yourself, one day you could drop dead, like that type of thing. And then it happened. So that really kind of hit me like a truck. Like I was like, whoa. And I wasn't mentally, like that day was never actually going to come. And then all of a sudden it did. I am a mom of two kids that are under 5, and it's a blessing, and I'm married, and I'm just very wrapped up in the trenches, as my mother would tell me. She's like, you're in the trenches, girl. But I was really focused on that. And so having this loss of someone so close to me was really when what Elizabeth says is on the job training. That's like really when my role with Grief Dialogues became so much more than just my role. Like, I work with this nonprofit and we do important work. And now it was like, oh no, this is like my heart right now. So I'm here, of course, as the marketing person, because that's my schooling and my brain, and that's really what I can contribute soundly. But also because I think that talking about grief and expressing grief is just so important. And as a young person who all of a sudden was the power of attorney and had all these choices to make and, big grief hurdles in front of me, I realized, and as a Black woman, I realized that there are a lot of obstacles surrounding grief that are just not addressed. And I think art is a great way to address them. So here I am with some crayons.
What would you say some of those obstacles are that seem to be common?
Okay, well, there's a lot. So I'll throw out a bunch, and to listeners, I'm sure that you will. Each one is different, and if it resonates with you, feel free to message, I think, any of us about these things. But especially me, I'm happy to talk about any of them. Ones that are important to me. Huge one was my dad, and in my family, we didn't talk about end of life. It was just like, no one's going to die. Mm-hmm. No one's going to die. Like, oh yeah, we all will die at some point, but we're not going to die. We're not going to talk about that. So when my dad was dying and he was in transition, literally amongst the last 100 words. I mean, I cannot kid you. He made the point, it was so important to him to like find these words that he could barely speak and say that he wanted to be buried with all these specifications, with his bass guitar from when he was in his band, when he was younger in Alaska, with his mother in the grounds, like open up her thing, like, and the bass guitar strap, there's something else. And I remember standing there with like my 1-year-old on my hip in this, hospital. We had just flown in because at the time we didn't live where he was at. And I probably hadn't showered in like 3 days. And I'm just looking at him like, my sister was there holding his hands like, okay, Dad, we'll do everything we can. And I'm here, the big sister, the power of attorney, literally borderline just like meltdown. Like, how come I didn't know you wanted this and I cannot give this to you, and with what money, and with like, it was the worst feeling in the world. So end of life conversations were is a big obstacle that it didn't click to me until that moment of how severe and how important it is to have those conversations. Another thing was, as a Black woman, I ran into a lot of diversity issues within our hospice system, which sucked. That was not what I wanted to focus on while my dad was dying and while I was trying to process that. Quite literally having people at the front desk not want to help me because of my race, or because they thought that perhaps I wouldn't have the funds to go through all of the hoops to jump through, because my dad wasn't economically set up ideally in their mind, which, like, fun fact, my husband and I are. So, middle finger to everyone who thinks that Black folks can't be successful for whatever reason. It was very frustrating that was an element in my process. That's not what my focus wanted to be. Another thing was that I had children. I have children, and talking to kids about grief is really hard. And also when you're trying to figure it out yourself, it's really hard. And kids ask really unfiltered questions, which are valid questions. Totally, but they're hard to parse through, especially as a young parent. You're like, I don't really know how to answer this. Anyway, so those are just a few things that were really important to me. I could go on and on and on and on and on, but yeah, I feel like now I'm rambling. Someone else have a good voice and talk.
I think it's interesting that
voice. You're like, oh God.
I think it's interesting that you sort of had that practice what you preach moment, right? Like, this has been your work, and all of a sudden you were faced with it. Was art something that, how quickly did you turn to art when you realized, like, kind of put 2 and 2 together of like, oh, this is maybe how I should help? Yeah.
So first of all, I'm a really artsy fartsy person. Like, I've always been like popsicle glue stick chick who like pipe cleaners, beads, drawing, doodling. Like, I've always been that type of girl. So I'm not scared of getting artsy. So I think that I turned my art into digital art, doing graphic design and marketing at some point as I became an adult and made a career and all those things. So the crazy thing is, I remember calling Elizabeth literally as Dad is dying. And I remember calling her, and she was just like my lifeline, but I wasn't calling her really to cry. I was like, okay, what can we do for marketing? What can we do for work? Like, for me, my art was the work almost, which I have mixed feelings on how I've handled that, because sometimes I push myself a little too much in the work zone and shove my feelings. But I think it's really important to express something while you're going through the emotion. So we interviewed somebody on our podcast, Out of Grief Comes Art, and they said something that really sticks with me. It's like, you just have to move the grief in your body. It's not like it's going to go away, but you got to move it. You can't just sit in one spot. And I think that's exactly what I did. So I think I turned to art immediately. And I would encourage most people to move that grief, however that is. If it's with crayons, if it's with graphic design, if it's with, it could be baking. Baking's a form of art, right? Like
journaling,
Yeah, like, just get it going, because if you just let it sit, I think it bottles.
Yeah. Are we ready to maybe create some art today?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. So this project, I don't know. We'll have to we'll try to be quick. So the first thing is to just bring someone to mind that, and this is maybe a question for later while we're doing this, Elizabeth, for you, is that if the grief that you're helping people process, if it's specific to a loss of life, or if it spans into loss of a friendship, which can be very difficult, or loss of a job, or, we can chat about that. But so if you're listening and you're thinking like, I don't have someone close to me that I've lost, maybe it's thinking of someone that you are close to right now. And I want you to write down, I don't know, like 1 to 5 things about this person, whether they're still here or not, that like joy memories that you have with that person. So I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. It could be one specific memory and then specific details within that memory, or it could be different things about them that bring you joy when you think of it.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. How are we doing? Yeah. Okay. And then I would like you to assign a color to each thing. And so that might be very literal. Like if it was someone's lipstick, like what color that is, or it can be just more symbolic. So assign a color to each one. And then I'm going to add my other screen here. Does that work, Richard?
Gerald, you're doing the work. I'll do this
part. Okay. So you're done with that part?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll take your paper, and it doesn't matter what size it is, what shape, and you can take either a pencil or a crayon. Like I would say, just draw lightly if you're using a color right off the bat. And we're just going to draw this. You can do this a lot of ways, but I'm going to draw kind of a spiral shape starting in the middle and just working my way out toward the edges. You could also just do concentric circles. That's another way.
I'm going to grab a pencil.
And as it gets bigger, the parts of that spiral, they can just go right off the page, if that's hard to see.
It's like the beginning of the Yellow Brick Road.
That's right.
Yes.
I think you are the Wizard of Oz, Richard.
No, I'm Dorothy, but that's another story.
This is like the third Wizard of Oz reference you've made.
Well,
you made one before we started too, when we were just like logging on.
I should start a Wizard of Oz podcast.
Did you just watch it?
You should do a Wizard of Oz podcast.
Okay, and since I think most of you are using crayons, Richard, are you using paint?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. So you'll take colors closest to what you assigned to each part of that memory. And we're going to start in the middle, and you could trace over that initial line that you made. You could break it up into pieces. We're just starting to fill out your composition with these colors that have a meaning attached to them for you. Some people like to make, if a part of the memory feels more significant to them, they'll make that color more prominent. Can
I ask a question?
Yeah.
Does it matter like light, like the one we start with? If it should be lighter, should it be darker? Does it matter?
That's a good question. I would say if you're using paint, you probably want to start light. Actually, any material. So yeah, I would start with the lighter color. Good question, Richard. So it's always easy to go darker. You can't. It's a lot harder to lighten it first. If you are, yeah, my mistake. If you already started, don't worry.
That's like hair truth. Like you know, you cut your hair and your hairdresser is like, "Are you sure you want to go lighter? Because we can't." Like, okay, well, that was the conversation with my hairdresser. Okay. When do we get it? Are we going to share our stories, or is this private?
Yeah.
Like, what do you
No,
think?
so I'll just, we're basically just going to keep building this out, and we can talk while we're doing this, but you're going to keep building out your design. Here, I can show some examples. Like this is one with concentric circles. This one is probably more like what we're doing today, where we're just starting to build out.
Oh, wow. That is
color.
depth. It's got a 3D effect to it.
So we can certainly chat while we're creating this.
So that I want to make sure there's no judgment here. I mean, like yours could be at the museum, mine could be in the recycling pile.
There is no judgment at all. It's just the fact that we're doing it, and I think it goes back to what Halle was saying, is that, you know, like it has to move through you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just letting it be more of a process piece, then there's no pressure of this has to hang somewhere.
This would also just be a great like memory piece to make with someone, like having you both add colors to it.
Can I just say also sometimes, at least for me, my brain goes, I think, and I have a hard time stopping. It's kind of nice just to have a brain break.
Yes.
You know, like, I don't know. I'm still very fresh out of this recent grief with my dad. And sometimes I just want to stop thinking for just a few minutes. Like I overanalyze how I'm feeling. Why do I feel this way? And what, you know, and sometimes I'm kind of just like, my brain hurts.
Yeah, I think it's taking us out of the verbal expression.
Well, so many times I know in grief, I don't always have the right words. And doing something like this, I just think is brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, and Elizabeth, could you share a little bit about, you know, I don't know if you like classify grief or how you guys have those conversations when you get submissions from people for your books. Are they specifically about people who have died, or is it a broader spectrum?
Our first book was about people who died. And all relationships, just about every scenario you could possibly think of. The second book, we're not as specific as that it needs to be a person, but our theme actually is out of grief comes art. Now, it doesn't have to be fine art. It doesn't have to be the museum quality piece, but the theme has to focus on that. So it could be a loss of a pet. It could be loss of a job. And sometimes that loss of a job isn't just a job, it's the loss of identity.
Oh my gosh, our episode that just came out recently was with someone named Benice Vinegar, and she's amazing, but she went through a major job loss, and it was like blindside, right? She had a whole identity, like grief identity. I don't know how to say that. She felt like she lost her identity and was grieving that. And it was such an interesting conversation because she was like, I really didn't realize I was so wrapped up in who I was with this job. And then just from COVID and things got rearranged and she was at a loss, you know?
Right. Her identity. And it was a layoff. It wasn't a firing.
No.
She, had been there quite a while and just kind of assumed that she would not be one of the ones getting those pink slips. So there was all kinds of things that factored into her grief that included the feeling of betrayal, in addition to no longer being, and then too, when you look at your job title, even when you were working in that job, is that really who I am? Sure. An executive assistant? That sounds pretty lame. Not that there's anything lame about it, but you realize just how much you were attached to whatever words were put on you, and then all of a sudden those no longer apply. And that happens when you lose a person too. You're still somebody's daughter. But when that person is that father, that mother is no longer alive, it changes your identity. And I'll never forget, shortly after my mother had died, my dad had died 4 years prior, that I realized that I was an orphan. And even in my advanced age, I still felt that, really intense loss, and that I was no longer, it didn't feel like I was necessarily somebody's daughter anymore. That feeling has since changed, but at first it was pretty powerful, and very, what I want to say, almost paralyzed me at the thought of not being an active daughter, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, with any loss, I think it's a change, and it's like, how do we cope with that change?
Sure, because it shifts your identity.
Yeah, and your reality, and it's like a new part of you that you kind of have to figure out what to do with. You're like, oh, okay, where do you fit?
Now, do you guys give tools for people to have more empathetic responses to grief? At the beginning, Elizabeth, you were saying, like, if that conversation ever came up with people, they just kind of was like, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, actually, we have a lot of resources and a lot of tools. One of the ones, if you want to make it fun, believe it or not, having those death talks can be fun. One of the tools that we promote is a thing called, I'll show you a box here. It's called the Death Deck.
Oh my gosh.
And this
It's
has
really
some wonderful prompts for having those conversations. So we share tools like that. We also on the website have other resources, but primarily our biggest tool, if you will, is encouraging people to share their stories. That is so healing, or it begins the process of healing. And sharing your story can be written. It can be doing art like this. It can be writing a song. It could be even starting a home-based business, entrepreneurial. So that's what we do. That's what we offer. But I would say, if someone said, what is the one resource that you are really good at providing, I would say it's stories. It's the sharing of stories.
Yeah, I would agree.
What have both of you learned about life, about death, since working in this field?
Well, I will jump in here real quick because I used to give talks at universities in the psychology departments of up-and-coming therapists. And I would start off the conversation with something like, studies have shown that 100% of the human race will die. You're going to die. Just back to life, right? You're going to be gone. So just kind of coming to that realization myself, I've seen so many things like maps of the universe, especially now that they have that new telescope, right? You see the vastness of the universe, and you are this tiny, infinitesimal, unimportant speck in this global, universe, and there could be even more universes. But the one thing we all have in common is we're all going to die. So I think that the biggest revelation that I'm one of many can help with the feeling of I'm not alone in this. And I will add that when my plays are performed, often that is the first thing that somebody will say to me after production. I thought I was the only one that felt that way. I didn't realize other people had problems with their brother when, at our mother's deathbed or whatever. That's been really something really eye-opening to me, is the number of people who really take solace in knowing they're not alone.
And what about you guys, though? Can you, and actually, while you tell me, I'm going to move inside because it's like raining, and there's light. So, but my question is, so everyone gets to come into my childhood home. I can give a house tour. But what about you guys? What have you learned with grief and art in your work?
Do you want me to go, Richard?
Sure.
So I guess just to explain a little to your listeners, we bring art experiences to patients and caregivers who are facing life-altering health challenges. So a lot of our work is with people who are going through cancer treatment. Oftentimes they are limited to their hospital room for weeks and weeks at a time. So they're very isolated. And I think when I was working with patients, what I noticed is even if they did not want to do art, we would end up talking for a while, and inevitably there was crying. And I think, and then they would apologize. Like a lot of people would apologize for crying. And most of the time my impression was it was them processing just this, for some of them, like this new reality that, hey, I'm undergoing cancer treatment. I don't know what's going to happen. There's, a lot of fear, and just being able to speak about it with someone, that came up frequently.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, Richard, if you want to add.
People do apologize a lot for crying.
Yes.
I do. I mean, I do too. Like I'll start crying, like, I'm sorry. My sister's like, no, stop. But
I'm a chronic crier. I'll cry over anything. I will cry over food. I will cry. I will. And so I never apologize. But I encourage everybody to cry because I always tell people crying is just as important as laughing. I think. But I think what I've learned is kind of what you were saying of, there's only one way out of here, and that's death. And it is fascinating to me that we as people, someone's got some awful feedback. This is why we don't do things live all the time. We as people, like, we haven't been able to deal with it. Like, and it's, I don't know, it has, watching people and becoming friendly with people in the hospital that aren't going to get to go home has sort of, I don't know, either softened me to the idea that it's just what is going to happen and it's a natural part of everything, or it's either hardened me into blocking it. But I find myself making a lot of art now when when I don't know how else to like talk about it.
When you need to process it, maybe. Yeah. No.
Or I'm sick of talking about it when there are too many people asking questions or there are too many things going on and you need to sort of go inside for a little bit.
Like the best question and the worst question all at once is when people ask you how you're doing.
At
least for me, like, I mean, just recently losing my father, they're like, how are you? How are you holding up? How are you doing? I'm like, first of all, I don't know. Okay. Second of all, we avoided that question this morning. We just went straight to coffee. So I'm not there. And if you really want me to unpack it, then I will cry. So Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Like,
yeah.
Those are all the thoughts in my head. So then I just nod and say, I'm good. And then I try to change the topic, which it's just that hard thing. I wish that we spoke about grief more casually because it is, I mean, death and loss really is the only thing that's guaranteed in this life. So why do we tiptoe around it?
Yeah.
I want to add that my sister gave me this pillow way back in time. Actually, our father just died. My husband almost died and was in the hospital. My mom had Parkinson's. I had to move her out. I had a 18-month-old with special needs.
I was going to say the boys were young, right?
Yes, yeah. Alexander was only 18 months. It was pretty dramatic. Anyway, and I would, people would say, "Well, how are you doing? How are you holding up?" And my response was always, "Really, I'm fine." And she actually found this pillow. And
I'm fine.
And I'm fine. And it's in my bedroom. So yeah, really, I'm fine.
I mean,
is
there
that
is.
what we're kind of programmed to say, even though that's not how we feel? It's too
I
bad.
mean, I feel like there should be a balance. There's a balance of like you're saying it because you want to believe it, and also you're kind of saying it to maybe in a nice way tell people like back off, I'm good.
Yeah.
But also, at what point do we give ourselves space and credit and maybe say like I'm not fine, and
who do we feel safe doing that with, right?
or where, and that could be with art, right? Like art doesn't really judge you,
Right.
True.
Yeah.
maybe or not.
How are these art pieces coming along?
Great.
They're coming on great. What I have found being a playwright and author and screenwriter too, for that matter now, is I started adding words to mine. Because I realized not too long ago, I can't do much of anything if I can't write a word.
Write a word. Yeah.
That's my go-to art, I guess.
Can you show that to the camera again so we can see it?
Sure.
Let's go around the room.
Doodling, and
I
it
love
says,
that.
"Why apologize for crying?" And then I'm going the other way. Fear. That's what I hear all the time. The fear factor. Not that people say I'm afraid, but in their words, when they're telling me a story, you can hear the fear in their voices. Sometimes I feel like that they say it because they're afraid that it might expand. So if they talk about their grief over their father, this might mean if they talk about it and they make it a thing that their mother could drop dead, or it seems like it's contagious kind of thing, which is too bad. I also wrote the word abundance and love down here, and I'll share this with you. The person I'm thinking of just died recently, David McDonald, Broadway actor, good, wonderful friend, 63 years old, died getting out of a taxi cab after just doing rehearsal for Kinky Boots in New York, which is a show he was in several years ago, living his best life. And so when you said choose a person, I wrote down all kinds, his smile, his voice, his energy, and then started attaching the colors. But then I had to go back to the words. That was important for me, for the words.
It's beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that.
Also, I would totally put that in a museum. Okay. So
yeah.
You were like, mine can go in the recycle. No.
Yeah.
Not today.
Not today.
And Catherine, I'm curious as to the choice of the colors. Was that it's very soothing.
Oh, for this one?
Yes.
Tell us about yours.
So my aunt passed away. It's been many years now, but she was a very vibrant, loving, fun person. I mentioned lipstick earlier because one of my memories of her is she always wore like this beautiful lipstick, and when she kissed you, it would stick on your cheeks. You're walking around with her lipstick on you. But anyway, so I have a lot of memories of her with these types of colors, whether it was things she wore or her lipstick or she's just very vibrant.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, Richard, your turn.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Mine's all wet because it's paint, but here's mine.
Oh, Richard. Okay, if you're listening and not watching.
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you even doing? You need
they
to
might
go
be
watch.
driving. Don't wait. No. They might be driving to work or something.
True.
Right? Listening.
Yes.
And we don't want you looking at the screen. So here, look,
No.
for all of you who they just shamed, I am here to have your back.
Thank you.
Don't text and drive.
And I love the primary colors.
So yeah, his is bright and vibrant.
Yes, it was. So it's my dad got really sick when I was in second grade. So I was picking memories, and he's still alive, but he's also still very sick. So there were memories before he got sick, and then I picked a couple of memories that like from after he was sick that we were able to create together. So those were the colors that represented those two things.
Beautiful.
Is there a reason that you picked mostly primary except for green?
Well, I can tell you what they are. So we used to green was actually for we all the neighborhood kids would come to our house and we would play games during the summer at night until like 1 or 2 in the morning, and my dad then would shove everybody in our car and bring each kid into home individually. So green represented like outdoors to me. And when he was able to work, he would work the late shift. So he would get home at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And during the summer, he would wake me up and him and I would take walks around the city I grew up in. Yeah. And so yellow was for the lines in the road, because we would see how long we could walk down the middle of the road in our little town that we lived in.
Until a car came?
Yeah, which was never, because I lived in a very small city. So
my sister and I lived in a small city too, and we did the same.
Really? Yeah.
Funny.
It was fun. But yes, we would always say, like, I wonder if like a semi is going to come, and no one would ever come because it was the middle of the night. Blue is for the Hearts New York Gala that he loves to come to every year. He flies into Texas and he loves to volunteer there. And then red, when my dad first got sick and he lost his eye and he wore like a patch for a while, I was in 2nd grade and I brought him in as my show and tell item. Because I was like proud of him and I wanted to show him off, but it also like there's a little bit of guilt in that. So there's like a little like red flash in my memory of that, of like, oh, that was so kind of mean to do to him. Like
the cringe, the cringy.
Yeah, like I wonder, I'll have to ask him when he gets here, but like I wonder what he thought of that when I was like, can you come show off your eye?
Your eye.
But he did it because I asked him to. So those were my 4 memories.
I love that because I'm a young parent, and so that's something totally like my 4-year-old I could see he would come to me and say, and I can only just imagine a little boy coming up being like, can I show off your eye? Like
yeah, really.
That's what I did. Yeah.
So what small town in Texas?
I actually grew up in northern Wisconsin.
Oh, northern Wisconsin.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's small towns up there.
There are a lot. Yes, it's like a completely different world. Halle, do we get to see yours?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes,
mine is cringy. So sorry. Here's mine.
Ooh. Yes.
Wow.
But mine's a cringy memory like yours. I should have put red in. No, so mine is my dad. I feel like that was kind of an obvious coming. But when I was, I don't know how old I was, 13, 14 maybe, my dad took me for my birthday to Tower of Power. And
what's that?
Tower of Power, the band.
Oh, okay.
You know who Tower of Power is. You don't know who Tower of Power is? Okay, first of all, it's like
we're listening.
We don't know.
Okay, like iconic black band staple, and okay, all right, that's fine. First of all, I was the youngest person there. Like they've been around since the beginning of time. They've basically been around since Jesus was here, and I was the youngest girl there, and they played at Jazz Alley in Seattle, and like I grew up listening to that, and I loved it, and he took me, and so we saw some of the original members, and they play, and they're like an all horns group, and they're just fantastic. And I was about to say any person over like 45 would totally know who they are, but Elizabeth was like, no, I don't know who that is. It's okay, but they're jazz, I guess. I don't know, they're pretty funky. And so he took me, and I remember it was just like such a big deal. He got me filet mignon. It was like I was so excited for steak because I love meat, and then I got this little tiny piece of meat, and I was like, what is that? Like, right, like I'm like 14, like very disappointed. I dressed up, and when I look back at the pictures, I wore this blue tank top and like a black skirt and heels, and just like the cringe. Who let me leave the house like this? Like,
your dad.
I mean, like, it looks fine as a 14-year-old, but now as a grown woman, I'm like, oh my God. And I think I probably have like some sparkly eyeshadow or something, just cringy. But that is one of my favorite memories with my dad, because we went, and I remember, you know, we stood up, and the band like pointed me out because, you know, I'm just like this little girl and everyone there is older. And my dad was so excited to get me this steak and made it such a big deal. And it was like the size of my phone. And, you know, like it was just, but it was it was one of those memories. It was my first time like at a live performance, really close to the stage with people who were really iconic, and you know what I mean. So,
And your dad was also a musician, so
he was. And the cool thing about my dad is, I mean, my dad was a complicated person, and he did a lot of talking and storytelling. So growing up, when he said he was in a band, we always were like, okay, okay. And then after he passed, we found that he was like actually a rock star in a band in Alaska. He wore like sparkly zebra print pants and heels and the whole nine, and groupies, and like we found a Facebook group, and on this Facebook group they've been looking for him for years, and because he doesn't have any social media. And then I was like, oh my gosh, Dad, you were actually a rock star. What? Like, so it was pretty cool.
Wow. I love that this project has turned into like laughter and like fun stories. Like it all kind of started off like, okay, we have to think of someone. Oh crap. Like, and and now we're just like, it's
kind of similar to how we approach grief topics. And this is a great example of how we can change that narrative of how the conversations usually go. Instead of like, hey, Dad, you're going to die someday. What does that look like? It's like, hey, when that time comes, what can we do to be fun? Like, what, what, I don't know if fun is the right word. I don't know. Depends your audience.
Put the fun back in funeral.
That's what my dad always says.
Can I take that, Elizabeth? I love that.
That's how we're ending this podcast. And that might be the title of the podcast.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Just saying. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Thanks for having us on your podcast.
And thanks for having us on your podcast. Everyone, this is a kind of a split duo tandem podcast extraordinaire affair.
A lot of fun.
Thanks for making art with us.
Yes. And
anytime.
All right. And the fun and funeral, everyone.
The fun and funeral.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Arts for the Health of It. This episode is produced by Hearts Need Art, creative support for patients and caregivers, and hosted by Richard Wilmore and Catherine Particini. You can support the show and help others learn about the healing power of the arts by visiting heartsneedart.org. The views expressed on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of Hearts Need Art, their staff, board members, or other affiliates. All content is created for informational purposes only. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice or to diagnose and treat any health condition. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health professional with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking